Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Julia Mize. I am the lead ranger for Dorchester Heights, which is part of the Hilda Harbor team, including the Heights and the Boston Harbor Islands. And today we're going to be talking with Faries Gray, who is the Sagamore of the Massachusett at Ponkapoag. How am I doing so far? Okay, but before we get there, I just want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral territory of the Massachusett tribal nation, who have lived on and cared for this land and water for thousands of years, and who continue to live here and care for this place today. I invite all of us to take a moment to reflect on what it means that Indigenous people have been here across the entire landscape of Massachusetts for more than 10 times the length of time since the English colonies landed here. And now, on behalf of the National Park Service and Boston Harbor Now, I'd like to welcome you to the third installment of our annual Revolutionary Harbor Lecture Series. We are still here. So, Faries, you are one busy man. And I know that you're involved in a lot of educational programs with folks all over New England to let the non-indigenous people know what the Massachusett and other indigenous tribes, what's important to you. But could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you are presently doing?
Sure, thank you. But right now, there's a big push. The most important thing I would have to say that the indigenous community is involved in right now within the Commonwealth is called the Indigenous Agenda. And in the forefront of this is anti-mascot bill that we're trying to get our leaders to pass a ban on indigenous mascots for all the public schools within the Commonwealth. If people aren't aware of the issue that the indigenous people have with mascots, is that mascots kind of mock our culture, speak of us in a negative way, really creates a hostile learning environment for our youth, all youth actually. And we're not mascots. We're living people. We're not people of the past. We are the only race that is used as mascot. Some people think that they're honoring us by calling us warriors, red men, but that's not honor. If people want to honor us, then we'll get rid of the mascots. So that's what we're doing. There's also a bill to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, which is really important for the indigenous community. You're not aware Columbus committed atrocities against the indigenous people in the Caribbean, the Arawak, and the Taino people, and to show him honor with a holiday, kind of lets the indigenous people here know exactly how you feel about them and the atrocities that were committed against them. In this day and age, I don't think we should be honoring people that aren't worthy of honor. And Columbus definitely is not worthy of honor for the atrocities he committed. So those are some of the things that everyone can help us with. You don't have to be indigenous to help us with. You can reach out to your representatives and ask them if they wish to co-sponsor any of these bills. Put some pressure on them to make change, especially Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, anti-mascot bill. There's no place for racism here today anymore. We shouldn't celebrate that. I also do educational. Part of my job as the Sagamore of the Massachusett Tribe Club is to educate people. Schools, organizations, anyone really that wishes some education about who the Massachusett Tribe is, who we were before colonization, what we went through, and how we are contemporary today. I also work for the Narragansett Indian Tribe as a ceremonial landscape specialist. In that capacity, I identify ceremonial landscapes that are at risk of being destroyed due to development. So that keeps me pretty busy.
Absolutely. Well, I know that I actually live in Rhode Island, so I'm very familiar with the Narragansett. I understand that they have just been given back the land that was involved with the Great Swamp Massacre. And that was only a few months ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. There needs to be more of that. The powers that be, people that are in control, whether it's city or towns or the state, needs to really look at the indigenous people within their state or their city or their area, and how can they help them recapture their culture and some of their homelands. Everyone knows what happened to the indigenous people here in what is the United States. It was horrible. It's horrific. There was genocide here. So many terrible things that happened to the indigenous people here. We shouldn't be about that today. We should be about making a wrong right if we can, and helping now, helping these communities, including my own, heal, and helping them regain their culture that was stripped from all of us. And that's one of the ways is our connection to the land that was severed during colonization. And so when you have communities or you have cities, towns, or the state returning land, they're kind of saying, you know, we're endorsing this reconnection to your land that you need to heal, that you should have land that never should be taken away. So I think that's awesome. And I think there should be more of that with the indigenous people here in the Commonwealth in the United States.
I know that the Harbor Islands is just a wonderful resource. That we're very lucky we've been able to preserve it. And, you know, we look at it today where it's been a place where people were quarantined, people were separated, so many things, prisoners of war camps, military encampments. But it was very different before first contact with the Europeans. So when the first Europeans came here over 400 years ago, that they were sailing these waters in the Harbor Islands, what would they have seen? How would your people have presented themselves in their land, and how they were working the land at that time?
Like some of the early explorers or the early traders that came here, one of them being Captain John Smith. I'm sure everyone's heard of John Smith. Many people aren't aware that he did sail these waters. Most people associate him with Virginia and that colony. He did sail these waters. And so I always use his words when someone asks me what the Harbor Islands or what our coastline or territory looked like before colonization. Captain John Smith called the Massachusett Territory a paradise for all these islands. So use your imagination, think of a paradise, what that would look like. But what he was referring to was our vast plain. And the Harbor Islands were an extension of our plain fields. Virtually the whole coastline was plain Massachusetts. So when these early explorers first sailed off our coast, they would see these planted fields if they visited during the summertime, the warmer months. They would see these planted fields. And like coming from Europe, where everything was pretty built up already, you know, coming here to see this pristine landscape with these planted fields that went on for miles and miles and miles, it must have been awesome. Must have been a sight to see. And even the aromas that would come off of all these crops that were grown on these planted fields, it's been awesome. It's out of salt water. And so that's what they would have saw of the landscape. What they also would have saw when they were sailing off our coast, they would have saw machineries. Machineries were dugout logs, or dugout trees. And some of these machineries were huge. Some fit 100 men. Our birds were smaller that we use in our river systems, but our ocean machines are huge. You have to think of the trees. How big are the trees? If we had a shoe or a dugout, those must have been huge trees. And so, you know, when I think about what our territory looked like before colonization, I kind of think about Avatar, that movie Avatar, and just how beautiful, you know, that landscape was, how big everything was, how big the trees were. And that's why I think of this place. I think everything was a lot bigger than our trees and healthy. I think the system was healthy. Our waters were rich with fish, so much so that the colonists said you could almost walk across the water on the backs of fish. There's so many fish there. And if you think about how healthy that ecosystem was, that it's what so much like, that must have been a beautiful thing to see. And so we would take our machines out to meet the colonists and train with them. And so that's what they would have saw. And if they wished to come ashore, they couldn't just come ashore. Honestly, they would have to get permission to come ashore. And permission was given by smoke. And the colonists were arriving off our shore. If they saw smoke coming from the shoreline, they would know it's okay to train, or okay to stop, or okay to come ashore. And these smoke signals, there were we used birch. It was deep, smoky wood. And so that's what they would have saw when the colonists first were sailing off our shores before they decided to colonize. They would have saw a paradise, an ecosystem that was pristine and intact and perfectly balanced. They would have saw thousands of my ancestors on the shoreline, probably hundreds of machines in the harbor. They would have saw a paradise.
I understand that in the ocean.
So sadly, our online guests are telling me that they're having some audio issues. Let me just take a look at this really quickly and see if I can fix it.
Don't you love technology?
I love it so much. It's my favorite thing. Hold on, folks. I'm just gonna mute this. All right, is that any better? Can you go ahead and talk
Yeah,
again?
can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Let's see.
How are we doing?
Better. Okay, great.
All right,
Thank you.
excellent.
Sorry, friends.
No worries. I understand that the ocean-going machines were used for whale hunting. Is that accurate?
Yeah, our really large machines were used to go after larger game. And it really wasn't fishing in the ocean. It was more like we were hunting in the sea or in the ocean. So some of these whales are huge. And it was a tremendous resource for our people to bring back some whale meat, these large mammals in the ocean. And it was very dangerous for us to go further out to the ocean in these machines. A lot of men's lives were lost while whaling. There've been a good number of burials found along the coast that had no skeletal remains in the burials, a ceremonial burial for some of our men that were lost at sea. And so that was like a tremendous honor to be able to bring back such a big game for the people. And it's not known really that we were also ocean people. We weren't just woodland people, eastern woodland people, we were also ocean people. And that was a really huge part of our culture and part of our life. And during colonization, we were cut off early on from the ocean. During the summer months, the warmer months, the ocean was our food source. That was our food source. Our planted fields were on the ocean, were on the coastline. And the food that we ate during the summertime came from the ocean. Our food stores that we used in the wintertime came from the ocean. And we were cut off from the ocean early on during colonization because that was a valuable resource for the colonists. And we were pushed further back, further inland to our hunting grounds. But that was a tremendous blow for the Massachusetts being cut off from the ocean, being cut off from that resource and that life force. And a lot of our men joined colonial whaling ships because that's something they knew, and that's something they had done their whole lives. And so it was an easy fit for them. But a lot of our men that left on these whaling ships never returned home. So that was another tremendous blow to our community.
One of the whaling ships in maritime were one of the few places where people of color could actually find work. Whether it's whaling ships or merchant ships or even the Navy up until World War I, is, you know, all people could join. So, you know, a lot of people don't realize that. I know that in, you know, the history of what the Europeans have done with the indigenous peoples, it's horrible. Particularly when you look at the harbor islands, with the Deer Island and the praying villages, 200 people stranded on Deer Island during the Metacomet War and left to starve. And the colonists, well, I don't think there was too many good things that you could say that the European colonists did for the native people. And yet, in the 1770s, when we had our revolution, many native people, African Americans, joined the colonists to fight against the British. Now, it was the other way too, because a number of tribes joined with the British, like the Mohawks, for example. But why? Why would, after how we were treated by, you know, the British and the colonists, why would you go to war for them?
So you have to think about what was happening here during colonization. First came the plagues that wiped out 90% of our people. And so you can just look at it as 10% of the people remained. And every year during colonization, tens of thousands of new colonists were coming in. So it didn't take long before the colonists outnumbered the indigenous in this area. And so, and you also have to remember that as a man, you are to protect your family. That was our duty. That was our job as a man, to protect your family, protect your territory and resources. And so, like when you talk about the Revolutionary War, I mean, that was over 100 years after at least the Massachusetts were colonized, or our territory was colonized. And the men had to still provide for their families. And joining a military or joining a campaign, that's one way you can provide for your family, which is really important that we provide for our family. We had lost our cultural way, or the natural way that we provided for our family, which is fishing and hunting. That was taken away. And so first came you would whale, and then if you could join the military, then of course you would do that by any means necessary. And so indigenous people are not too different from any other people on this planet. We choose sides, fight for one. Some indigenous people, even during King Philip's War, fought on King Philip's side, and others fought on the British side. So I guess it just depends on who you're loyal to or who you like, maybe. Maybe it's about who you like. Because I mean, even today, I mean, I always pose this question: why do indigenous people even join the military to fight for this country? Why would they wear that flag for a country that has done so much harm to you? Because they're warriors. They need to provide for their family, and they have that in their heart. And so that's some of the reasons. I think that if we look at the indigenous community as a whole, instead of looking at the indigenous community as people, everybody has their own reasons for doing whatever it is they think is best for their family. And we're no different than any other person on this planet. Individually, we decide what's best for ourselves and our family. And if that means that go off to fight a war, either today, go off to fight a war in a foreign land, or fight a war that happened 200 years ago on either side, I believe that those people that did so were doing that because they were doing what's best for themselves.
Could you tell me a little bit about the hierarchy of the Massachusetts, the social hierarchy, the governmental hierarchy, before first contact, and then how that changed after colonization.
Traditionally, when I say traditionally, we think of traditionally before colonization, that we consider a traditional time, before the influences of colonization, before the Europeans coming in and offsetting the balance of our whole society. So traditionally, our leaders were what we call sachems or sachems. And it wasn't that dissimilar from the democracy we have here today. So the Massachusetts would have 3 traditional leaders. We would have a sachem or a sachem. We would have a powwow or a powwusk. And if you have ever heard the word powwow, what it means is a powwow was a medicine man in our language. That's what a powwow was. And a medicine woman is a powwusk. And so we would have a sachem, a powwow or a powwusk, and then we would have a Sagamore. And the Sagamore was traditionally a rough translation, a war chief, a protector, responsible for protection of the territory, protection of the rest of the people. And so a lot of times, or sometimes, not a lot, Sachem and a Sagamore, those words are interchangeable. But sometimes that person is the same person. Sometimes the Sachem is also the one that's protecting him, the one that is leading the warrior in the time of war. And so sometimes that's interchangeable. And the colonial records would sometimes call the Sachem, the Sagamore, the Sagamore, the Sachem, and there was some confusion for the English who didn't totally understand our culture. And so that was 3 traditional leaders. But when it came to our villages and our towns, in our planting fields, we had different leaders. The women were the leaders of our planting fields, really the core of our whole culture. Was our planting fields, was our resource, that tremendous resource to planting fields. The women, there were the women's planting fields. The women owned the planting fields. The women owned all of our housing, the wheat tubes, the long houses. They owned them. And also our women were also some of our leaders. We had a tremendous amount of women leaders also, which was different from the whole European culture, unless you were talking about the queen. But sometimes the women were the leaders. And right here in this area, we had a woman leader. Her name is Wasa. That's really not her name. Her name was never recorded because she never wished it so. She never told the English or let the English know her name. She only was referred to as her title, which was Squasa. And I know that there's been a lot of attention to that word squaw brought in a negative way, but you should know that that was one of our words. And the confusion around that word is because colonists brought that word in their conquest west and used that word for other indigenous peoples who didn't speak the same language as us. And they use that word in a negative way. But it's not a negative term. And shouldn't let the colonists be the one to rob us of our words just because they use it in a negative way. So once the colonists came here and upset everything, they didn't really care what your status was. They didn't really care who your leaders were. Like I said, 90% of our population died during the plagues. We can relate to that because we all went through COVID, how afraid we were. But the death rate for these plagues was 90%. And so 10% of our people remained. A lot of our leaders died in this time too. A lot of our leaders died within the first 20 years of colonization. A lot of our leaders died from plagues. And so our leadership was upset. Our leadership was upset. And leadership was passed down through generations. You kind of groomed to be that as a child if you were the child of a leader. kind of groomed them. But the people had to also accept you as that. So when the colonists came here, and this still happens today, where they just need an Indian to sign something. They get power by letting an Indian sign something, letting indigenous people sign something. And it's kind of a way of things of doing that we do today, or the colonists still do today, where if they don't agree, or if they ask an indigenous person to do something, or indigenous tribe to do something, and they say no, let's say, not saying you do this, but let's say, I'll use this as an example. Let's say you asked the Massachusetts if we would do this talk about the islands, about this area, right? And we said no. Let's say we said no. And you just went and got another indigenous person. So we just need an indigenous person. This happens a lot. We just need an indigenous person. So rather than work to create a relationship with the indigenous people you should be dealing with, you just go and find an indigenous person so you can do whatever it is you want to do. And that still happens today. There was a lot of that going on during this early years of colonization, where if they needed a deed signed or they needed permission, and the indigenous people that they needed it from said no, they would go get another indigenous person, maybe trade of something or of less stature or of no leadership role, get them to sign something or give them permission. Because the colonists didn't really need, from a power viewpoint, permission. They needed it for their own legalities. They needed permission. They needed documentation. So there was a lot of that happening. So the colonists kind of put people in power that they needed to be in power, which kind of undercut our way of doing things in our leadership culture. But that happened a lot, still happens today. But presently, we do have, Massachusetts do have 3 leadership roles. We have a Saco, we have a Powers, and we have a Sagamore. We also have a tribal council. Some tribes have councils, a youth council. Some tribes have an elders council. And a tribal council is, at least for the Massachusetts, it's for the whole tribe. And really, the whole tribe governs our structure. The people govern. The people say what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. Like me being the Sagamore doesn't mean I can just go out and say, this is what my tribe's going to do, and the tribe's going to do it. I could say it, but the tribe's not going to do it, unless the tribe agrees to do it. So our tribal council is really the whole tribe, really. And they decide as a people the directions we take, of the projects we take on, what's best for us. So that's how our structure is today. It really works for us. Everyone is included in every decision making that the tribe makes, which really is an awesome thing, because everyone has the power, kind of like everyone has the power in our society.
Now, we're very, very fortunate that for the National Park Service, that our director is Indigenous, and our the Secretary of the Interior is Indigenous. I mean, this has never happened. And one of the ways that the power was taken from Indigenous people was through the so-called Indian schools. Really starting here in Massachusetts with John Eliot and we call the Eliot Bible, and all of the, making, let's make the tribal people less scary. Let's make them more English, John Eliot said. And so, cut your hair, can't speak your language, you can't wear traditional clothing. And then this was just compounded in the mid-1800s by the National Indian School, starting with Carlisle, which I understand a number of folks from the Northeast, the tribes from the Northeast, said there were basically told they didn't send them voluntarily; they were taken to send to Carlisle. And now we're we're having a reckoning with our Secretary Holland saying, we're going to make sure that everyone is accounted for. All those who died in there, they're going to be returned to their people. How do you see this reckoning that we're having now with these changes? How do you feel about that?
You know, the foundation for this country was literally built on the brains of the ancestors, of the indigenous ancestors. What was done here in the Commonwealth and across all of the countries was horrible. It was genocide, terrorism, all the nastiest things of humanity happened here. Indian schools is one of those. You know, and there's been a real effort to bury everything, all the bad stuff that's happened here to the indigenous people. And we're quick as Americans to point the finger at other cultures, not here, call other people terrorists. We are so quick to condemn other countries for doing exactly what this country did. And I think the reckoning needs to happen there. I think this country needs to be accountable for what the founding of this country did to a whole people, not just one nation, hundreds of nations. All the women that died, the children that died, the men that died. And I've always asked myself, this is a real question, how did the colonists become patriots? I really want to know that. How the colonists became the patriots. The indigenous people were the patriots. They embodied everything that we call a patriot. They were fighting for their homelands, for their culture, for the way of their life, for their spirituality, for their children. They were fighting for their freedom. But indigenous people aren't looked at as patriots. When we have Patriots Day, we think of indigenous people. Those were the real patriots. The colonists weren't the patriots. And that's what I mean with being accountable. We have to be accountable for what the colonists did. They murdered, raped, stole, all the nastiest things. This really happened. This isn't a story. This isn't something that I'm making up. This really happened. And we have to acknowledge that these things happened. This country took children from their homes to convert them so they wouldn't be raised as ignorants. What kind of people do that? Could you imagine someone coming into your homes, taking your children out because they want them to be raised a certain way? And can you imagine your children never coming home? Can you imagine your children being buried in a mass grave? You never know when it happened. And this just didn't happen here. This happened all over this country. And so I think this country needs to be accountable for its founding. It needs to be accountable for what it did to the indigenous people and for what it continues to do to the indigenous people. You know, indigenous communities need to heal. We have wounds that's so fresh, generation, trauma from generations of being beat down, being mistreated. But Americans need to heal too. We all need to heal. And it starts with being accountable, with acknowledging that something so terrible happened here. And we can't hide it. How do we hide it? How do we hide it from educating our youth about what happened? How come you have to be grown and find out on your own what happened? How come the genocide here isn't talked about? The genocide in Europe is. How come these things aren't taught to our children? It seems like America doesn't want to bury what they did to the indigenous. They'll talk about other countries. They'll talk about World War II and the atrocities that were committed there. But they won't talk about the atrocities that founding of this country. And so, like when I think about, the Indian schools, when I think about that, I mean, I just think about how terrible the people were that did that. What kind of people do that? And how do we glorify this country for doing such things? It's really scary. It's really sad. And how do you make it right? I don't know. I mean, I guess you start by talking about it. Like anything else that's traumatizing in your life, you have to start talking about it. And I believe this country has a lot of talking to do and a lot of explaining to do. And we need to start listening to the indigenous community of what we need to heal. Because when it comes down to it, it's this country that did it. This country did it. And the only way that you can make it right is by talking about it and listening to the indigenous people, what they need, and making their needs true.
We are in the midst of celebrating the 250th anniversary of our revolution. And one of the themes that we are focused on here at the National Parks of Boston is the unfinished revolution. And this is just what you're talking about. Then we have a lot of unfinished business. We have a lot of unfinished knowledge. We have a lot of unfinished history in order to move toward the more perfect union that is part of our founding that we seem to be treasure so much. And to add insult to injury, after the colonization, particularly in the last 200 years, we basically see, what I call from the book of Genesis, the Christian Bible, that you will have dominion over the earth. And that dominion is essentially the rape of the earth. That's what we've seen for the last several hundred years. And I think we're obviously in trouble. We're in trouble now. We're in big trouble. And how can we turn that around? I know that many organizations, including the Park Service, has looked at that indigenous knowledge to help turn around some of those terrible things that we've done to this earth and our fellow creatures. And I know you spoke, we had a great conversation. You talked about indigenous knowledge. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. When I first spoke here, I told you about the paradise that was here. This ecosystem was perfectly balanced. We didn't have domain over our environment. We didn't rule it. It wasn't our environment to decide what we wanted to do. We coexisted with all life. I think it starts there. Our society today looks at mankind, people like we are the apex of creation. We're the top. Everything else is under us. That's a flawed way of thinking. You can never be balanced that way. We value our lives more than anything else. Any other life on this planet, we value ours, for which makes us the ones that should have such value placed on our lives. And if you think about this planet, if humans disappeared, does anybody really think that the planet would suffer? If humans disappeared? That can tell you where we are in this circle. Now, let's say the insects disappeared. The planet definitely changed. Will it survive? Who knows? But us, are we even needed? And so for us to think that we are rulers of this place, and now we look at our planet and we can all acknowledge that the planet is in trouble because of us. So something has to be done. When the colonists first came, there was a story I tell. When the colonists first came here, we told them they can't cut down all the trees. And they said, sure we can. Don't you understand the technology that we have? We can cut down all the trees. We said, no, you can't. They said, watch us. And they decided to cut down all the trees, cut down all the old growths. And these same colonists, when they came here to fish, we told them, you can't catch all the fish. You can't do it. And they said, sure we can. Don't you understand the technology that we have? We can catch all the fish we want. And they did it. They caught all the fish. Then you fast forward 40 years. And now people are saying, wait a minute. You know what? We can't cut down all the trees, guys. We can't do that. We need the trees. Uh-oh, we can't catch all the fish. We catch all the fish is going to upset that whole ecosystem. We can't do that. And so the way that indigenous people think, the way that our culture is, that we coexist in this perfectly balanced ecosystem that we call the planet. We coexist. We don't take everything. You can't take everything. Physically, yes, you can, but you can't take everything. You can't abuse everything. You can't have too much of it. And I always say that it's like in reality, the Christian way of thinking and the indigenous way of thinking are fundamentally different. Because the indigenous people believe everything is equal. All life is equal. Blade of grass, a tree, everything's sacred. Everything is sacred, should be treated sacred. Everything, every animal, every insect, every person, the sky, the mountains, the trees, should be all treated like sacred. But with Christianity, it's thinking that everything isn't sacred. Like humans have this knowledge where we can have dominion over everything. Well, we don't have to wonder. We can just look at what we've done to our planet, figure out on our own that something's not right. We obviously are wise enough to be the masters of our own environment because we're destroying it. We're acting like we're addicted to destruction. There's trash everywhere. Our waters are polluted. Trees are seriously unhealthy. We're unhealthy. And so something's wrong here. Or maybe it's our thinking that's wrong. Maybe we should realize that we are in a closed ecosystem and that everything in this ecosystem is sacred, including ourselves. And we should treat it accordingly. And it's really hard to convince people, even people that want to do the right thing, that they have to stop doing the thing that's killing the planet, that's hurting our ecosystem. Our footprint, even this place here, is humongous. It's too much. I was talking earlier, my friend, saying this, it's just too much here. It's too many people. We're consuming everything. And the indigenous way of thinking is not about consumption. It's about balance. It's about honor. It's about protection. So it's that way of thinking that we should incorporate. The indigenous way of thinking, of balance, of honor, of sacredness, of everything not having a monetary value to it. Even the islands. I want the islands to be left alone. I want our harbor islands to be left alone. We want the harbor islands to be left alone. We want the structures to be removed from the harbor islands. We want the harbor islands to heal. That's difficult to do when people think that they need to save something of human making. It's kind of putting our wants as humanity above the wants of our own environment. And that's the kind of thing that needs to change if we really are going to change the course of this destruction on our planet that we're causing. And it's not just the indigenous people here. This indigenous knowledge is global. All indigenous communities understand that we need this balance. And all the indigenous communities, not just here, but globally, are fighting to have people listen to them when they tell them we have to stop. Seriously, we have to stop because we're all going to have to stop. So in the coming years, the coming decades, we'll see how serious people are about balance and restoring the balance in our own environment by actions. We've heard a lot before where we want to do what's right, but sometimes that doesn't happen because there's politics involved. like I said it before, people have the power. It's not your leaders that have the power, it's the people. And if the people want to change, they want to change and save our environment, people will do so.
Feel like saying amen, brother. We've covered just the tip of the iceberg, as they say, but I want to give other folks a chance to ask questions. And we do have a couple here from that were sent in by email, and I'll just read these out. This is from Fred. And forgive me, Fred, if I mispronounce your name. Fred Chanania. I hope that's correct. I am most interested in the way that indigenous people use the New England forest, other than just for using wood burning for warmth, especially the seasonal circuits of food gathering from forest to ocean to riverine areas, and also how the indigenous people manage the forest and land to the extent that they did so, that is, burning some forest land to promote good browsing for hunted species like moose, deer, etc. I'm also interested in any information on with the introduction of maize crops arrived in this area and how it changed the seasonal circuit patterns of food gatherings, if in fact it did so.
So the forests, you have to remember, they were ancient forests, what they call old growth forests. And nothing was done because we just wanted to do so. Even if we wanted to cut down a tree for a machine, that tree had to agree to. And it's hard to understand now. I mean, if you're a nature person, you talk to trees. I mean, so you understand. But people that aren't connected that way, they don't understand that you can communicate with all life if you listen, if you feel. And so we get permission to use anything. That's why the Avatar is one of the best movies, because it kind of, it kind of shows that, even though it's a movie, it shows that you need permission. We just can't do things because we have the power to do so. It just creates it messes up the balance. You can't just do that. And so everything was done out of necessity. Everything was done because that's what needed to be done. It wasn't like if we wanted to clear some space, it wasn't like, oh yeah, I just want to clear some space because, I think it would look better. Things weren't done that way. That wasn't the way we thought. Everything was about balance. Everything was about permission, communication with all life around you. And so that's what we did. And our riverways, they were used, those were our highways. That's how we would move fast. Let's do the rivers. We use smaller machines for that. And so I'm sorry I forgot some of the other questions.
That was kind of a long, burning forest lands to promote good browsing, an introduction, information on how the introduction of maize crops, corn, I guess the three sisters, the corn, beans, and squash, how they change the seasonal circuit patterns of food gathering.
Well, if you use this person, well, they were asking about the introduction to something that probably happened thousands of years ago. I have no idea. That's one of the devastating things about colonialism. It erases a lot of your history. That line is broken. And so they're asking about something introduction of something that happened and how it changed, how we did something. I don't know. Who knows if it was even introduced? Who knows how it was introduced? That's all, going by stuff that people find from thousands of years ago. But I can tell you, we were farmers. We didn't just grow corn or maize. We grew a bunch of crops, beans, squash, nuts, grapes. I just found that out not too long ago. We had orchards of grapes. It wasn't like we just went to the forest and found some grapes. And that's what the history in schools want you to believe. It's like we were just like some some savages walking around. Oh, there's some food over here. Let me go grab that. No, we were not. We were farmers. We cultivated crops. We took what was here naturally and cultivated. So that's how I like to think of it. And so that changed the way we did things, where we weren't just hunter-gatherers. We were farmers, and we were masters at it. Our crops were very successful here. This land was very fertile. And there's a reason why the colonists put this area colonies, because this was a very fertile area. And it sustained their colonies, and it did. We have an open country.
And there's one more question, which I think you actually already answered, but this is from Rose Doherty. What are the best ways to make native use of the islands as part of public history?
Some of the best ways to use the native or the islands, hire indigenous people, hire us. Hire us to conduct the tours on the island. That's awesome. You want to tell people about indigenous people on the islands or in the area. You need to have indigenous people doing these things. You can hire me. But no, seriously, the islands are really important part of our history. They're part of the historic history as well. The islands were used for some very bad things by the colonists. You have to remember when Captain John Smith sailed by, he called it the paradise. The colonists came here and turned it into the nightmare. They put all their unwanted on these islands, including the indigenous people, the Irish people when they first came here. And they put sick people on the islands. They keep using the islands for negative things, for things that they don't want, that they want to hide. And that's not what they're for. The islands were once the paradise, and we can make them the paradise too. And the thing is about the islands, if you look at the city of Boston, all the surrounding communities, so developed. The islands aren't that way. They can be this jewel for the city of Boston, not just for the whole bay. They can be this jewel. But they need to be repaired, they need to be left alone. That's what they need to be. Not saying people shouldn't visit them. You need to stop building stuff. We need to return the islands to their natural state. Those islands need to heal. And these are one of the things where we're being asked about this indigenous knowledge. Our knowledge is saying that the islands need to heal. And that's a place that's doable. It's not like it's populated, like you're going to be throwing people out, kicking people off of their homes. It's not like that. They need to be returned to their natural states and cared for, like they are jewels. And stop putting what we want ahead of what the islands need. That's what the islands. That's what we think the islands. And if there's tours and people wish to know about the islands, then reach out to us. We'll be happy to talk.
So, yep, I think we've got 7 questions online, okay, and then I'm sure you folks do have some questions as well. Do you want to read the questions?
Why don't we do it? We're gonna hear real fast. And
Yep,
kind
why
of
don't we
back
do-
and forth, one version. Does that work for everybody?
Good idea, Ollie.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much, Ferris. I think one of the things we talk a lot about past history of the indigenous people of the Massachusetts, and I think for a lot of folks raised in the United States have this mindset of, oh, this is one way of being indigenous, and it's very much looking back towards the pre-colonial history. And I was wondering if you could speak about, how have your people in the Massachusetts, like in the 21st century, 2023, there are Massachusetts people who are living and breathing this culture. Is that, I'm just sort of curious about how you all experience sort of that connection to the past, and then also coming into the future as people who are still here and growing and changing.
Well, our connection to our ancestors, we like to say, has never been broken. even during colonization. And it's really our culture where, you know, how we're raised to, that things aren't taboo like they are here in this culture. You know, if we see one of our ancestors as a child, our parents aren't saying to us, "Oh, you didn't really see that. You imagined that." What we would call like a ghost, I said ghost, or you saw a spirit. We wouldn't say, "Oh, that didn't happen. You're just imagining. You were dreaming." You know, we talk. Well, what did this ancestor say? And we take that as a connection. Um, and when we dream, we don't treat our dreams like it's just some random thing, and no attention should be paid to. A lot of times, our ancestors, no matter how distant they are, communicate to us through our dreams. Sometimes the future communicates to us in our dreams. And it's that kind of being connected that's never been broken. So it's like, I'm not saying everybody doesn't feel that way, but I'm saying the culture here today is not like that on the whole, where things are listened to that way. Because I know when my children have a dream, even at night, I want to know about it. I want to know the details. I want to know who visited them. If they say they saw something, I believe them. I believe they saw something. Even like here and today, when we go for walks in the woods, sometimes it'll be a bird or an animal or an ancestor will visit us, and we'll listen to them. We'll conversate with them. They'll take us to a place and then show us stuff that's been hidden forever. It is because we're listening. And I don't think that, you know, indigenous people have that ability or have that connection exclusively. I think that all of us do, because we're all related. I mean, unless you don't come from this planet, but then we're still all related because we're still all in this universe together. So we're all related. But that's some of the ways that we stay connected. Even today, we've never lost that. That's some of the ways that we do stay connected.
What do you have online from us, Brittany?
All right, so I've got. I'm gonna start with a simple one, Faris, then we'll get into some of these more complicated ones. So from our old park friend, Denny Sarnapuka, Denny would love to know, can you recommend any readings, activities, or events where we can learn more truths about Native culture in this area?
In this area, or events?
Yeah, events, readings, activities, and things just open to any
Well,
recommendations.
I mean, honestly, I don't know every activity that's happening in this area. And it's like, I know that we have some things coming up, but I probably should know exactly what they are. I know we have some things in Salem and Cambridge coming up, birthdays coming up. So we have some things in Cambridge coming up, but I would just say, you know, Google it. Just Google, you know, in your area, please Google. Because everything's online. I mean, that's how I find a lot of things too. But that's how, and reading in this area, oh wow. So, I mean, you'd have to go back to like colonial records. You've got Pontoon, you got Elliot, even though, you know, indigenous community is not too fond of Elliot, but it kind of brings you down a wormhole when you start looking at these historic peoples in times where it connects you to other stuff. So, I mean, that's what I would recommend. But that's how I did my research. Sorry that it's probably not the answer you want.
Okay. Go ahead. Yes,
Thank you so much. It's really good meeting. Are the indigenous people making any progress towards being more respected or reconciliation, the thing that you're talking about? Because you don't hear about it.
Right. I mean, to be honest with you, this is an awesome time to be alive because I just feel like people are changing. It's like the culture and the mentality around us. It's not like when I was younger or my mother or my grandmother was younger. It's really people are being more aware and having more empathy and having more understanding now. And so I guess we are moving forward. we are getting closer than the generation before me. People are listening now. People are understanding now. And so that's all part of the healing process. We are working with a number of towns who are looking to change the way that they do things in their towns. A lot of it is shown by these cities and towns that have indigenous mascots. We've been pretty successful with getting some of these cities and towns to change their mascot. And so that's a step in the right direction because they're understanding, they have an empathy, which is huge to be a human being and be able to have empathy for another human being. That's tremendously healing for both. But I mean, in the same note, we have other communities that say, we're not changing our mascot, it's ours. And so there's plenty of room for more growth, more understanding, more empathy. But I mean, I think that people are evolving into a better human than in the past, but we still have a ways to go.
All right, this is from an anonymous attendee. So the question is, from my upbringing, I have always thought of a protector as a person who's defending something. And yet when I look at the things you do, I see a forward-leaning protection, a person who is not reacting, but someone who's thinking how to take care in a forward-leaning way. So can you share with us what your priorities as Sagamore of the Massachusett Tribe are? And how you juggle both reacting to threats and also moving actively on things important to Massachusetts.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I do is I fight for our territory, basically. Against construction, destruction, to save some of our, not just ours, just indigenous ceremonial landscapes. And that's part of my job as Sagamore, is to protect our land, our culture that remains. And a lot of that is seen in development, because there's a tremendous amount of development. A lot of it with solar farms. So why they don't build solar farms on top of all the buildings, I have no understanding. Why they have to cut down forests to build a solar farm is beyond me. But that's where a lot of it comes from. There's a lot of confrontation and protection that happens with that. A lot of times a city or town will reach out, residents in a city or town, we need to save this forest from being developed. And it's just like, it's really it's like an uphill battle to do so when you're fighting against construction. You're fighting against money, and you're fighting against a town getting money for something. And sometimes the town wants it to be there, so they get that tax for it. So that's, one of the jobs that never end for me. And being the Sagamore and sticking my neck out. Another way is protecting who we are and who our culture is, and a lot of that time is spent with going against these towns that don't want to get rid of their indigenous residents. And you would think that it wouldn't even be an argument to keep it. Indigenous people said, we're not honored, we should change it. We don't want to be known as the red man. You would think that would be so clear, but it's not. A lot of times we have to go into these towns and convince not only the school committee, but convince the actual town to support it. So that's something that is always a challenge. Sometimes it's gratifying. Get to meet people that understand and that fight with you. And so, I mean, that's just some of the ways where I'm protected. And also I protect our tribal members, protect our women. Not that they all need protection, but many times it comes from, the protection is needed from men a lot of times. So that's another thing that I do. Sometimes if we're at I think it's like a Zoom call, something like that. It was about a mascot. Students would attended through the Zoom call, and one of these students showed disrespect to one of our women. And so, you know, that's where, you know, I have to step in, or any man should step in, and just make sure that that does not happen, and make sure that student understands that they should honor and respect, no matter what culture this woman is from, all women. So this happens a lot when you're out there and you're trying to do this kind of work. And so those are just a few of the ways where, you know, I fit into that role. I didn't want that role. It's not like I said I did not want this role, to be honest with you. But I mean, we have to do what's best and what's asked of us. That's why I'm here.
You've been talking a lot.
Oh,
Water.
Do I sound like I need water?
Everyone knows.
Mark?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. We talk about all, you know, all creatures and all the affected. How do you feel about mosquitoes and ticks and poison ivy?
You know, that's like a trick question right there. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure out what maybe mosquitoes and ticks and stuff. Maybe that's population control, because I still can't figure out why they are necessary. But obviously they're here, and believe me, I will smack a mosquito, and I will definitely try to squeeze a tick. And poison ivy, I mean, they just don't want to be bothered. They leave me alone. That's what a poison ivy is screaming. Leave me alone. But mosquitoes and ticks, I'm still trying to figure out what their purpose is. But I've come up with it's got to be population control. So yes, they must be treated like all other life. But that's a trick question. I know.
It's funny you say that. I've heard but not confirmed that mosquitoes kill more humans during the course of history than anything else. So
Yeah, it's got to be.
might be on
It's got to be population.
Great. So I've got a question from another anonymous. Can you speak more about the forced removal of indigenous people to the Boston Harbor Islands? And how would you envision the park honoring and celebrating those lives lost?
So what happened was there were multiple removals of the indigenous people. The first one was well before King Philip's War, to where males from one of our villages were removed because the colonists said that they were conspiring against them. So they removed the males of one of our villages to Long Island. These males were kept out of that village for a year. Now, during this year, the women were left unprotected. The children were left unprotected. The territory was left unprotected. And so, I mean, that was just one. That was the first removal. And it's not, we're not just talking about one of our villages. The removal of the indigenous people from these, they were praying towns. So these were towns that had converted to Christianity. They were indigenous people that had converted to Christianity. They were doing exactly what the colonists wanted them to survive. And it was a matter of survival. Converted from Christianity, it was a choice: survive or die. Those were the choices we were left with. You either convert or you die. Because here, in this area, the only indigenous people that survived colonization were in praying times. In praying times. And so the reality was, if you did not convert to Christianity, you died. And so when indigenous people, when we were removed from praying towns, they were removing the indigenous people that had agreed to do exactly what the colonists wanted. and they removed them from these printing towns because they said they were afraid that the indigenous people would rise up against them. But that should have been the first sign that you were doing something that wasn't right. If you're afraid that people are going to rise up against you. But that's what it was like to be indigenous. That's what it was like. That was part of the horror of conversion. That even when you were doing exactly what they said, it would still take you, put you on the islands in the middle of winter when there's nothing there to eat, no shelter, couldn't bring anything with you. There was a reason why we used the islands in the summertime, not the wintertime. And how I like to have people understand what it's like. Just imagine today, somebody came into your home and took you and your family out, forced you out of your home with weapons. How afraid you would be, how afraid your children, how traumatized you would be, and put you in a concentration camp type setting. So imagine what that would feel like. And I mean, we're human beings. We can use our imagination. That's one of the things we can use our imagination to create beautiful things. So just use your imagination to try to feel what that would be like here and now. If somebody came into your home and did these things to you. So that's what being an indigenous person during colonization is like. Even when you did exactly what they wanted you to do, they were still trying to teach you. Oh, I hope that answered your question, whoever anonymous is.
Selena.
Hi, thanks everybody. My name is Steve, and I really appreciated the picture you painted of what this place was like 400 years ago, with the beautiful paradise and also the horrendous environment that was created. And I'm just wondering if you could fast forward 400 years from now, what would your vision be for this place?
What would my vision be for this place? Oh, geez. So if I could fast forward 40 years,
Yeah.
my vision would be that there'd be no buildings here. Really, there'd be no buildings here. You're getting in trouble. You're gonna get in trouble. My vision for this place would be, honestly, if humans have not learned how to manage their environment, that the environment would take it back, honestly. That if we haven't learned how to manage and balance our own environment, that the environment would take everything back. And if you think about the wants and needs, like something you want versus something you need, we seem to be a society that lives on all the wants, and not always just what we need. Think about what we need to survive: food, shelter, clothing. I mean, it's not a really big list of what we need to survive, and we're kind of abusing that. So, in my vision for 40 years, I would just envision this place with just a better ecosystem, with humans involved, where everything we do, everything that we build is done so to balance our own ecosystem. Everything, from the vehicles we're driving, to any buildings we build, to how we produce food, how we produce energy, it's just all these things. I wish that we could use this wonderful imagination that we have and create this perfectly balanced ecosystem that my ancestors could be proud of. Because I just know if my ancestors were brought forward from 400 years ago to now, they wouldn't even know they were in their home. They would have no idea where they were, because that's so much the ecosystem has changed in 400 years. So, I mean, in 400 years, we're either going to get more earth friendly or we're not going to be here, I believe. So, but I do envision a more balanced human being 400 years. So.
Our next online question is from Russ Cohen, and Russ would like to know, Faris, if you are comfortable talking about this. Are there any initiatives currently underway to return land to the Massachusetts Tribe? And if so, how can those of us that wish to be allies in this worthy effort lend support to that?
Any initiatives to return land, I'm not aware. But I mean, anyone that's listening, if you want to return some land to the Massachusetts Tribe, you can return land to the Massachusetts Tribe. It's not too difficult to return something. I mean, it's really not that difficult. If somebody wants to return something, whether it's the Commonwealth, whether it's DCR, whether it's just a person. I mean, if you want to return something, you return it. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's just about, what a person is gonna do and what they feel like they should do. Do I think they should be returned? Absolutely. The Massachusetts aren't unique with being cut off from their own lands. That happened pretty much to all the indigenous people. But here in our territory, anyone that owns land in our territory can return it to us if they so chose to. But there is no initiatives that I know that is directed at land being returned to the Massachusetts. I just know that if somebody wants to return land, we're here. So it's not too difficult.
Question from the audience? Okay. Do you have any more questions online?
Are we good in this, in the audience? Okay, great. Yes, we do have a couple more questions. So this kind of relates to something you talked about earlier, Ferris, about having had the protection knowledge broken. But someone was also wondering if there are any maps where, that the tribe still has that are labeled with their original Massachusetts names, and that would include bodies of water, hills, trails, rivers, etc. Just curious. This is John Pearson.
As far as I know, traditionally speaking, we didn't have maps. We had no need for a map. If we needed to show somebody something, I'll give you an example. Champlain was writing. Champlain, he was a French explorer. He was writing, it's one of his writings, he was talking about when he sailed here to Massachusetts territory, when he sailed to what is the northern Massachusetts territory, near Cape Ann. He was asking the indigenous people there about the coastline, and this indigenous person, this Massachusetts man, he didn't say, "Oh, hold on, I'll be right back," and bring out a map. He didn't do that. What he did was he drew in the sand. He put 6 pebbles on the sand. And he was telling Champlain that these are the 6, this is his word, 6 powerful Sacoms or leaders, Sacoms of the harbor. And so he drew a map in the sand. But as far as I know, there is nothing permanent. There was no permanent maps by my ancestors or by the Massachusetts. That was definitely a colonial thing where they drew lines on maps and said that this is that, this is that, this is that. I mean, our culture was more oral. If you wanted to know something, you had to go to the person and find out. And so it was more oral. Our history was passed down orally. And our knowledge of place was passed down orally. But as far as I know, we didn't have any maps that say our territory. We knew our territory went to that mountain over there, or to that stream over there, to that river over there. We knew where our hunting grounds were. We knew where everything was. Sorry, I don't think we had any maps.
Mark, or sorry, Kathy, sorry, I saw I handed that correct.
I think, a few of us here are educators, and particularly we teach about the islands. And I'm just wondering, what you say about how educators can honor and teach cultures, about cultures, especially that we did not come of. I think I often feel like sometimes, it's not my place then I also feel though, I don't want those histories and that culture to be omitted from what students and kids are learning. Because it is so. So I'm just wondering kind of how to reconcile that, knowing that I think one option, you know, you already spoke to, like, we're here, like, hire us to do that.
Right, exactly. We're here. And I'm working with a school department where they're bringing me in to do a workshop for their educators about my tribe. And I think that that is an awesome idea because, I mean, in the past, we would go into each class, teach, but it's like, that's every class. Oh my goodness. I mean, we would do it, of course, because, you know, that's what we have to do. But it's so much more effective if we teach the educators. And you know, the Massachusetts Tribe, we are very relationship. We want to form relationships. We don't just want to write our history and then, you know, you read it. We want to tell you our history. We want to practice our culture, our tradition, orally telling you. You could take notes, of course, so you can remember. But I mean, if you work for your school system, try to see if they can get a workshop for the educators to where we can come in there and kind of teach the educators about that local indigenous community, that local indigenous culture, so that they can teach their students in turn. And that's very effective.
I was kind of hopping on that education realm. A lot of times, with youth in the classroom or in park setting as an educator, you hone in on specific stories. Are there any, and you know, using primary documents and sources, are there any specific like individual stories from this area, indigenous stories, specific people that, you know, document that really shine through or would be good connections?
There's a lot. I mean, the one thing that the colonists did is wrote everything down. They wrote everything down. They weren't looking through it, looking at what they were writing through our eyes. They were looking through their eyes. But they wrote everything down. And so, but our stories still remain. Cosmology still remains. Our spiritual belief still remains. Our stories of our leaders still remain. Our stories of our women leaders still remain. And so that's very powerful to teach our children, of course, but also other children about things that happened here. It's not all bad. I mean, with the colonists, it is. You know, it's pretty all dark. But before colonization, we have just awesome stories, awesome stories, awesome stories about our cosmology, about our relationship with nature. So those are all really good education tools.
We had one more back here.
I'm agree. Things to start off with things that were inappropriate or touch base on something more appropriate things that whether it's learn about more colors and food, dance, today.
Well, I mean, I would have to say what I spoke about earlier is the indigenous agenda. That is so important to our community because we're talking about real like laws being passed here that would have real long-lasting effect to the indigenous community. It's not just the Massachusetts indigenous community, and our lawmakers need pressure. To be honest with you, to do the right thing, because we all know politicians about votes. They are so. They're worried about votes because they want to stay politicians. But so we really need to put pressure on them to make these changes. Columbus State needs to go. Needs to go away. And I know some people are just like, oh, Columbus was awesome, but Columbus really was not. And it's okay that he wasn't. He did really bad things. And so we shouldn't be honoring people that are not worthy of honor. I mean, that should be universal, no matter who the person is. And so that's a way you can support the indigenous community, is supporting the indigenous agenda. And this mascot thing is huge too, because you know I grew up in an indigenous mascot school, and I can tell you firsthand, you know, having my classmates, you know, hearing them just try to act like they're indigenous. It's like I wanted to climb on the bleachers during Black Pep rallies. And it really made me so uncomfortable. And having children that were faced with playing on sports teams that had indigenous mascots, I would have to pull them off that team and tell the league, whether it was Little League or whether it's Football League, that it's absolutely inappropriate to have that as a mascot or as a logo. And so that's something that hits home to all indigenous people. And it should affect everyone, because we shouldn't accept racism in our school or anything. We shouldn't accept racism in any of our schools. And our lawmakers should know better. They should act on it immediately, but they're not. So we really do need help, like the citizens of the Commonwealth, to all stand up and tell them you need to change it or you're not going to be in office. Basically, that's what they need to hear. But we really do need help. That's how you can show your support real time for the indigenous.
Thank you so much. This time has flown. We're right at just before 8 o'clock, and I want to, Ferris, thank you so much for coming here tonight. Everyone who's attending in person, and all of you who are online. I understand this will be recorded and will be on YouTube on the bostonharbor.org.
Yes, Boston Harbor Island's YouTube page should be up in the next week or so. So just keep your eyes peeled. We will try to email everybody who registered on Eventbrite to let you know what it's supposed to be.
Wonderful. Thank you again. And I hope this will just be the first of many.
Yes.
Thank
a lot
you.
of time.
Thank you so much.